The mistake for me, ultimately, if you even bring it up to a higher theme, was going into a leadership role and thinking that I could change someone else. I could change their heart. I could change their mind. It just wasn't something that I could do, but it was something that we fought our way through for a few years, because the only people who can really choose to change and change their behaviors are those individuals. Having the ego to say, well, you should do things the way I do things.
Yeah.
And again, whether that happened almost 20 years ago, it has really informed who I am as a leader today, as a consultant in business that I've done, as a coach in coaching others. I believe that many people will appreciate and will honor when you can be in front of them and let them know that I made a mistake and I won't do that again, but I learned from it. And to a certain extent, when you apologize and you ask for forgiveness in that space, that's the uncommon.
Well, hi, and welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graban. Our guest today is John Gallagher. He is the founder and CEO of his Rowing Champions LLC. He's a coach and a mentor. He worked for a consulting firm for a decade after being an operations manager and a division president for two different companies. And John is also the host of a podcast called The Uncommon Leader. So I encourage you to check that out wherever you're listening to this podcast. So John, thanks for being here as a guest today. How are you?
Mark, I'm doing well. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to spending the time with you. I've been listening in on a few of the past episodes, so this should be fun.
And you're like me as a podcast host, and sometimes I put up a Post-it note to remind myself I'm the guest, so I don't make the mistake of.
Yeah, I mean, I so often think about that. Just as it is a little different, although you have many more interviews from that side of the microphone than I do. In your experience, I've been listening in to learn a lot from you, so I don't have quite as many bad habits to get rid of sitting on this side of being the guest.
I'm curious what my bad habits are.
We all have them.
We all do. And I try to not repeat those mistakes over and over again. Like, for example, and I'll try not to do this to you today, John. Sometimes I will accidentally combine two or three questions into one when maybe I should just parcel them out one at a time. So you can coach me. You can coach me on that. We'll see how it goes. So John, there's all kinds of things we can talk about today, but we like to dive right in. Looking back at the different things that you've done, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake, I've had a great time trying to think through this. And while I know I have too many probably to choose from, there is one that kind of comes to the top that I've actually used in stories before. And oddly enough, Mark, I had a Facebook post pop up from 11 years ago when I wrote something very similar. So my favorite mistake is kind of hung along as I went through. But as you touched a little bit on my career, I had been in operations where I ran a small fuel transfer pump company in Fort Wayne, Indiana for about 5 years, and then really made a family decision to move back to Roanoke, Virginia, where my wife's family was from. And at the time, it was an opportunity that for me, I was in an organization that was very successful from a manufacturing standpoint. Our results were good and continuing to grow. And it was something that I was pretty comfortable from a business and career standpoint with the work that I was in. But it was clearly a family decision that we made. So while leaving a successful manufacturing job as a division president could be seen as a favorite mistake, that actually wasn't the one that I would go forward and talk to. But what I ended up doing was coming back and deciding that I could do some of the skill set that I had in process improvement, continuous improvement, and implement that from manufacturing into real estate sales. And my mother-in-law had been in real estate sales in Roanoke, Virginia for about 30 years. And I had this great idea of teaming up with her to take some of the continuous improvement, lean methodologies, if you will, into real estate sales and talk with her about that. And she seemed to be up for it. So we teamed up. And others might say my favorite mistake would be going into business with my mother-in-law, but that wasn't it as well.
So that could be risky. That could have been.
That could definitely be risky. Many of the cliches are never do business with family members and things like that. But the fact is, even almost 20 years later, we're still on talking terms and doing really well. And not in business together anymore. But the favorite mistake part of that, as I went into business with her, was me having the ego of thinking I could change someone to make them kind of follow the management system I had learned to adopt to over the last 15 years. That was a continuous improvement methodology. And ultimately what that led to for me in trying to change my mother-in-law's behaviors was frustration for me often, and really frustration for her, for me asking her to really behave or perform from a business standpoint in areas where it just wasn't her strength. So the mistake for me, ultimately, if you even bring it up to a higher theme, was going into a leadership role and thinking that I could change someone else. I could change their heart. I could change their mind. It just wasn't something that I could do, but it was something that we fought our way through for a few years and actually generated some success. But it took me a couple of years to learn that in the journey as well.
Well, I'm glad, John, that you could resolve to the point where you're on speaking terms. That is important.
That is important, especially with family, because you get, as you say, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. That's for sure. So
yeah,
we are still family, and we're still in good spirits. Absolutely.
Well, good. And it seems like, that general advice, whether, different flavors of it, of don't go into business with a relative, don't go into business with a good friend, don't loan money to a family member. It seems like, the risk is if something goes wrong, now you really screw up this relationship. And maybe a lot of people go into it thinking like, well, yeah, they say don't do this, but we're going to be successful. So
we'll be different.
Will be different. I guess there are always exceptions to the rule, but sometimes the quote unquote rule is there for a reason.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And again, I don't even know that it was as much the family as the mistake as it was, again, me having the ego to say, well, you should do things the way I do things, and coming forward with that, and how it took me a little while to learn and really adapt and adopt to that. And again, whether that happened almost 20 years ago, it has really informed who I am as a leader today, as a consultant in business, that I've done as a coach in coaching others, because the only people who can really choose to change and change their behaviors are those individuals. And all I can really do is model and ultimately see what others will see in the work that I do, that they'll want to do that as well. But I had to learn to adjust to that. And there were probably things that slowed us down as a result of that favorite mistake, especially, again, asking her or asking any individual to work in an area that might be outside of their strength zone, sort of outside. And it can be in a learning zone from a comfort zone standpoint, but ultimately in organizations, it takes a lot of different aptitudes in terms of the business to make it successful. And if you have too many people that are just like you, that go through that and think just like you, you're probably going to limit, or the lid on your organization is going to be set that you won't exceed the goals that you really could exceed.
So, I would like to dig a little bit into the story of some follow-up questions, but first off, if you could, John, regular listeners will know, because of my professional background, I don't know, maybe one out of every 10 episodes, I'm talking to somebody where this methodology comes up, this term lean, when we're talking about this style of improvement or this management system. But what would be your elevator speech version of, all right, well, so John, what is this lean approach?
Well, thanks for asking that, Mark. It's interesting because as I think about lean and how I have learned it, if you will, in manufacturing, and then deployed it in manufacturing as a leader, at that time, for me, and it still is today in terms of my elevator speech and consulting or coaching as well, but that it was the passionate pursuit of the elimination of waste. And you do that through ultimately looking at the processes that you have, breaking them down into value added and non-value added tasks, into those tasks that you really don't need to be doing all the time, but which are those that you need to repeat on a regular basis and make happen. So as I saw it in a real estate setting, again, looking at where some of the strengths of my team member was going to be, I thought there was an opportunity to put systems in place and processes in place that would allow us to scale that business even further, capitalize on the relationship building that my mother-in-law, Nancy, had already done, but also to systematize that, put it into processes, put it into standard work, so that when we had new listings, we had the same 17 steps for marketing a listing that went through, or if there was a buyer that we had, and after the contract, what are the 23 steps in what order that have to be done to get that contract closed on time? So it was those processes that she may not have had that would have allowed the business to be able to be scaled more. And then secondly is on the other end, or on the very end of that, is the visual management of that, the scorecard, the keeping score and setting goals for the organization. And I saw both of those really as an opportunity to succeed in that real estate space, where I saw that there was a gap in many of those individuals who were in that business.
And so the opportunity, and this is one of the challenges of being a coach or a consultant or whatever term you're using, you can see the opportunity for things to be better. You can see the gap in performance. You could see how a different way of doing things could help close that gap in performance. But then often the person you're trying to coach might not see the gap. They might think their performance is fine. And that might be true. Like, performance is fine. Maybe they don't have the same desire to try to push it to be better. Like, what were some of the change dynamics there? You mentioned earlier that maybe it was just some of the new methods were uncomfortable, but was there, I wonder, a more fundamental issue of where your mother-in-law thought, well, business is fine. I wanted John to help me out, not to reinvent me, or something like that?
No, I think you almost answered the question for me in some of the points that you made. For example, I'll just use specific examples. No. I mean, I think it's just you hit the nail on the head with regards to some of those, but a different one or a specific example I would use. And again, that relates to any business, not just real estate, or relates to any coaching relationship, not just with your mother-in-law, but would be that I set up visual management inside of the office with ultimately the goals for the month. And I knew we needed a certain number of closings per month to be successful, which is the outcome metric. But I also knew that to do that, we needed a number of touches or a number of contacts that we could have in there to get leads into the funnel to make a difference there. And I started to list those contacts up on the wall on sticky notes and had graphs for our performance in terms of the monthly numbers that we would close in both transactions as well as revenue that would come in. And it just wasn't something that she was interested in, that many people aren't interested in seeing some of the visual management that occurs. And again, I think I realized that it took a while, but it was something that I was able to capitalize on and then learn that how do I continue to capitalize on her strengths, which was the relationship building in the industry as a salesperson and bringing those leads into the system. She wasn't necessarily as interested in taking those leads all the way through, but you need all of those different business types inside your business to make things happen. So it was recognizing that ultimately led to us having more success and ultimately being recognized as one of the top realtor teams in Roanoke in our third year in business, so which is really good.
That's a really interesting point. We talk about discovering the opportunity to focus on strengths instead of problems. I think from our professional background, as you said earlier, you used the word waste. Like we're focused on the problem, the waste, the defect, and some people, depending on how their experiences or how their brains work, sometimes people might say, well, you're being too negative by pointing out these problems. And I think you raised a good point. There's room for both perspectives, I think, in a successful company.
Absolutely. One of the authors that I read a good deal about, and this is a leadership author, is John Maxwell. Hey, Uncommon Leaders. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I believe in doing business with people you like and trust and not just a company name. That's why a strong personal brand is essential, whether you're an entrepreneur or a leader within a company. Brand Builders Group, the folks who have been helping me refine my own personal brand, are offering a free consultation call with one of their expert brand strategists. They'll help you identify your uniqueness, craft a compelling story, and develop a step-by-step plan to elevate your impact. So head on over to coachjohngallagher.com/BBG, as in Brand Builders Group, to schedule your free call and take the first step toward building a personal brand that gets you noticed for all the right reasons. That's coachjohngallagher.com/BBG. Now, let's get back to the episode. CDs, I remember listening to his before podcasting was really cool. He had the CD club and then the tape club before that, but he talked about the 4 aptitudes of a leader and that each organization, each team needed all 4 aptitudes. He talked about strategic as an aptitude. He talked about operational as an aptitude. He talked about the vision casting or directing in the organization as well. And then that 4th aptitude being the team building type aptitude as well. And so again, I went in there very much with an operational mindset that was going to fix this, visual management, new processes and things like that going forward. But the aptitude that I missed was that team building, that relationship building, my team member capitalized on and did really well with. And I got myself too focused on the operational side early on in that journey. Yeah.
And it seems like there is another opportunity for balance is looking at process versus personalization of service. So I've run across this in healthcare, as I'm sure you have, John, where like what you were describing for real estate, you could look at a surgical procedure and say, well, here are the 23 things that have to happen in advance in the sequence to help ensure that there are no mix-ups or errors and things that should happen after the surgery. But you would get pushback of somebody saying, well, every patient is unique. I'm like, well, to an extent, that's not true, but in some ways it is. And I think when a lot of times people in healthcare hear about process or standardization, I hear pushback, boy, there are a lot of people in the software world that don't like the word process. But I think they fear like that'll be taken to an extreme in a way that would prevent them from responding appropriately to the needs of a particular patient. I wonder if I would expect there's almost a similar dynamic maybe in real estate where someone would say, look, every client is unique, every home sale is unique. How did you work out that balance between process and personalization?
No, I think you make a phenomenal point, and certainly in healthcare, it is there, right? I mean, you have an industry with highly trained and educated individuals, and you go in there and ask them to standardize some of those things, it becomes hard to convince others. Look, you have someone that's been in real estate for 30 years and ask them to go in and standardize some of the things that they've done. It's going to be hard to get them to really buy into that as well. So part of that, as we go forward, the relationship component of consulting or coaching, regardless of the industry, is that, rather than trying to drive that vision forward really fast with regards to implementing new processes or implementing standardization, as you talked about, but rather getting those people to buy into you first, whether it's the customer or whether it's a team member, that they will buy into you as a person, then they'll learn to trust you more, and you have a better chance of making that influence again and modeling to get them to change. And I do agree that people would say in real estate, there are buyers that are different across the industry, and there are different segments, no doubt about it. Just like there are different elements or specialties in healthcare, there are different types of buyers in real estate as well. And you have to be aware of those as an individual that works in that business and really change or update your standard to support the relationship building. But it doesn't mean that each time you sell a house, there still has to be a termite inspection. There still has to be a home inspection. There still has to be a disclosure statement. There still has to be a loan application generally. All those things need to be done so that you have the time to be the empathetic doctor you need to be, or the empathetic real estate agent, or the empathetic leader you need to be in organization. Leader standard work. I know you've written about it before. What are the things that leaders need to do on a daily and weekly and monthly basis to be successful? And anytime you talk about having them document their daily or weekly standard work, there's a sense that they feel, many leaders will feel you're trying to take away my creativity when you do that. And it's absolutely not. I mean, as we go forward, it really is about standardizing the things that can be standardized so that you can be creative when you need to be creative. Absolutely.
Yeah. And to what level do we standardize? I'm just thinking back to a few years ago. My wife and I bought a condo, and in Florida, we moved there for her job. The realtor was great. This was probably a standard practice for him. After we closed and we got to our place and we opened the refrigerator, there was a surprise. There was a bottle of champagne, a pretty nice bottle of champagne in the refrigerator. And we thought that was a really nice touch. And we really, we happily consumed it. That was a good fit for us. But I could see where if his thing was, I always give my home buyers a bottle of champagne, there are going to be some home buyers, for whatever reason, don't drink.
That's right.
And wouldn't necessarily appreciate the gesture. So I'd be curious I don't remember if he learned enough about us to understand if that would be a nice gesture, right? So does he standardize on, I always give a bottle of champagne, or I always leave some nice surprise as a home warming gift? You could standardize that a couple different ways, right?
Sure. But to your point, how are you standardizing the relationship building component to determine if they even drink, right? In terms of they going forward with that, so that when you give them a bottle of alcohol for a gift, they don't actually get somewhat offended because you didn't know that they didn't drink. So it can be a risk, no doubt about it. But ultimately, that's where some of the after gap analysis comes into play as well, right? You learn through some of the mistakes. Unfortunately, in healthcare, you learn through making mistakes. You hope that they're not mistakes that result in death, but they do. And what is your reflection process? What is your continuous improvement process that allows you to go back and update your standard to put a question like that in place that says, I normally give a gift at the end, just wanted to see if and a gift of alcohol would be something that would be something you would appreciate. But you're right. I mean, it's also that continuous improvement loop of learning that you must do to continuously update that standard.
Yeah. And I like that point you made about having some steps and being proactive and understanding enough about the person who's buying the home so that they could learn proactively. Because let's say they gave the bottle of champagne to somebody and they were upset on some level, but they didn't say anything. You don't have that feedback.
That's right.
loop.
You don't have the feedback loop.
And so I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned. I really like the way you put that about standardizing some of the relationship building.
Well, I think at the end, look, that relationship building is so important on the front end, the relationship building, whether it's the questions that you ask to learn what the real problem is, or in the case of real estate, what their real want is. Mm-hmm. And again, my mother-in-law had a phenomenal way of getting a buyer in a car, driving them around for an hour, having them tell her what they wanted at the start. And by the end of that conversation, she actually had, really nailed down exactly what they did want based on listening to them, based on asking them questions where they lived, what age their kids were, what sports they were engaged in, all those different things that would allow her to get it ready. Was it standard for her? No. Would I have tried to get it where she had a sticky note on the front of her windshield to get that done? I might have if I would not have learned properly and said, no, she just knows how to do it. Let her get that part done. But
if she was bringing a young, inexperienced realtor or agent into the business, then something like that might have been useful as a training guide.
Absolutely. A couple of things that I keep going back to as I talk and listen through, and even in healthcare, it was Atul Gawande's checklist manifesto, and even the powerful TEDx video that he's done with regards to standardization, how he was a surgeon. The other thing he did, you touched on this, is he brought someone else in to observe him, what he was doing, to learn and improve. So it's not only about how we do things in a standard way, but you said that it's the feedback that we get as well. What did we do well, and what could we do better to continuously improve? There's the spirit of lean, if you will, again, of continuous improvement, and of the humility of a leader like Atul Gawande, specialist surgeon that he was, that was always looking to get better at what he did, and he believed in checklists, standards.
So I think, yes. Well, and I think, my attempt at summarizing some of what you've said here is that standardized doesn't mean inflexible, and standardized doesn't mean permanent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Standard work, which is standardized, is the best way we know how to do it today. It's not the best way necessarily we know how to do it tomorrow. You're exactly right.
So I want to, before we talk about your podcast and some of the leadership coaching that you do, John, one other question looking back for reflection. When you talk about being a consultant, a coach, a son-in-law, you're in a position of having to influence or convince, or, you're in a position of leading without authority. When you were a company division president, were there times where, whether you were intending to or not, you could sort of get away with telling people what to do? And if you were put back into a role like that today, would you operate differently based on what you've learned being a coach and consultant?
Well, I think there's no doubt if I were put back into an operations role today, I would behave differently. Hopefully I've grown in that years, again, learning from some of these, quote, favorite mistakes as I've gone through, and even through learning as a consultant and observing other leaders through this journey, other chief executives and C-suite members, as well as frontline leaders who have challenges in making continuous improvement, that I've made improvements there. Going back to the first part of your question, really about, was there sort of a belief, if you will, that I could tell others what to do with regards to positional leadership? Probably, especially early on in my leadership journey. I don't know that I could recall a specific time as I go through that, but I do know absolutely of times where people would give me feedback if I was doing that, and how I could make continuous improvement. We go through different levels of leadership. Another John Maxwell book, The 5 Levels of Leadership. And just because we're given a position, doesn't necessarily give us the influence we need to take someone where they wouldn't go on their own as a great leader. You get to level 5 leadership in terms of making a difference and leaving a legacy by going through those phases of the journey. You start off as the boss, if you will, but you have to build relationships. You have to build competence. You have to build decision-making capabilities that allow you to earn your way up on those levels of leadership. And again, I think through my continuous Uncommon Leaders, thanks for listening in to my conversation with Mark Graban on his great podcast, My Favorite Mistake. If you enjoyed the conversation, I encourage you to share it with someone else you know who needs to. With Mark Graban on his great podcast, My Favorite, Hear This Message. And go ahead and follow Mark and me on social media. We're sharing tips all the time for how you can grow your leadership and how you can focus that energy on continuous improvement on a daily basis. And certainly we get a chance to share some of our favorite mistakes with you on those platforms that you get a chance to learn from as well. Interested in hearing more conversations with great leaders like this? Check the show notes for a link to the Uncommon Leader podcast. I encourage you to subscribe so you'll get a notification in your email each week when a new episode comes out. Until next time, go and grow champions.